Good day, everyone. And once again, your favorite uncle is back, and welcome to our channel. And we are continuing with the solving for quadratic equations. That's our grade 11 content. So if you haven't subscribed, please just do the right thing and just subscribe. And of course, tell everyone that you know that your favorite uncle is doing the things that matter. All right, so let's look at it. We are solving for quadratic equations. This time I want us to look at the concept of completion of the square, or completing the square, right? So remember, we've already spoken about quadratic equations. If you haven't watched the first two episodes, just please make sure that you watch that, okay, so that you can know what we are talking about. And we said this is what a quadratic equation looks like, a standard form of a quadratic equation where we've got a, b, and c, right? Now, what we always try to do is to put it in standard form where we know that it's an equation that is equal to 0, okay? So we're going to talk about completing the square. And this is going to be very, very important because I'm going to show you where the quadratic equation actually comes from a little later on. So I want us to take the first one, right? So supposing that we've got, let's say, x squared minus 5x minus 6 is equal to 0. So we've already put it in standard form. Oof, I've written it so badly there. Okay. So we know that we've already put it in standard form. All right, so we want to solve by completing the square, right? So I want you to follow me in how we're going to do this. By the way, this is going to be very important when you do graphs, especially parabola, as well as when you are doing the equation of a circle, right? So now, when you complete a square, what's the first thing that we're going to do? What we're going to do is that the first thing is you're going to always try and make sure that the coefficient of x squared is 1. So in this case, it already is 1. Can you see that? So, and how do you do that? You do that by dividing by the coefficient of the x squared term, right? So we don't need to worry ourselves about that because it's already 1. So then the next thing is we are going to isolate the one number. Please, I want you to listen carefully, the constant term. So I'm going to say x squared minus 5x. Okay, I'm going to take the 6 to the other side. Okay, right. Now, then we take the middle term, we divide it by 2, or you can say we multiply it by half. So I'm going to do this over here. Okay, so I'm going to take the middle term and multiply it by half. And in this case, I am going to square it thereafter. Okay, right. So I am going to simply say, right, so I'm going to take negative 5, okay, and I multiply that by a half, and I square the entire thing, right? So negative 5 times a half. So remember, negative 5 is the same as 5 over 1. So we're multiplying fractions there. So 5 times 1 is negative 5. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. 1 times 2 there at the bottom. That's going to give us 2, and we square that, right? Now, of course, what you get there is going to be 25 over 4, if you agree with me. But what I'd like to do is just to add it exactly as it appears there as negative 5 over 2 squared, right? So remember, this and that are exactly the same thing. So then I take this, okay, and I'm going to add it over here. So it means I'm going to say, right, plus a negative 5 over 2 all squared. But remember, what I do on the left, in order for me to make sure that I maintain the balance, what I do on the left, I've added something that wasn't there before. So in order for my equation to still be the same, I will add the same thing on the right-hand side. So plus a negative 5 over 2 squared. Okay? So just please keep that in mind, right? So now I've added two things that were initially not there, but to make sure that they balance out, I've added the same thing on the left as well as on the right hand side. So in effect, in fact, they actually kind of cancel each other out. Okay, so I want you to think of it that way. Now, then what I'm going to do is, now I'm going to open a bracket. Okay, remember I've added something that wasn't there, right? So what I'm going to do is, okay, so I'm going to have x minus 5 over 2. Now notice in this case, right, I take the thing that is inside there and I am now going to square it. Okay, so it becomes x, so I take the sort of square root of this one and the square root of that one, put them inside one bracket, and I square them. So remember, this and will give you exactly what you have there at the top. So essentially that's why I wrote it as 5 over 2 all squared, so that I'll remember when I factorize in this case, just becomes the square root of that and the square root of this in one bracket, and I square that. Right, and then I go to my right hand side, right? So remember I've got 6 there, right? Because I'm going to take a product there, this becomes plus, remember, it's going to be 25 over 4. Okay, now if at this stage perhaps you still don't know how to add fractions, don't worry too much about it. You can use your calculator, but later on I'm going to show you how to add fractions. Okay, so we can say 6 plus, let's take our fraction, that's going to be 25 over 4, right? Okay, so that's 25 over 4. Okay, that gives us, okay, let's, oh gosh. Okay, so I've just done something there, so that's 25 over 4. Okay, and I get that as a fraction. I'm just trying to convert it to a fraction. That's 49 over 4. So on the other side, I've got 49 over 4. So now it means that x minus 5 over 2 all squared gives me 49 over 4, right? So what I'm going to do now is I am going to take the square root on both sides, right? Why? Because in this case, this is a perfect square, and that's also a perfect square. So in this case, what I'm going to do is take the square root on this side, but what I do on the right hand side is that, remember, once you take the square root, you're supposed to always put a plus or minus. I'm going to explain that later on. Okay, so remember, the square root will cancel out the square here, so that will be x minus 5 over 2, right, which is equal to, on the other side I've got plus or minus the square root of 49, that's 7, the square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so now it means for my answer I've got x minus 5 over 2 is equal to 7 over 2, or x minus 5 over 2 is equal to negative 7 over 2. Those are the two solutions, right? So let's take that. So that's going to be 7 over 2 plus 5 over 2, or x is equal to negative 7 over 2 plus 5 over 2. Right, now let's take that. So 7 plus 5, remember, that gives us 12. Okay, so that will be 12. So remember, when we're adding fractions, right, and with the same denominator, we just simply add the numerators and keep the same denominator. So that becomes 12 over 2, or in this case, x is equal to negative 7 plus 5. Remember, because the denominators are the same, I keep the denominator, and in this case, I simply add the numerators. So negative 7 plus 5, that will give me negative 2. So what is our final answer? So x is equal to 6. 12 over 2 is 6, or x is equal to -1. Remember, negative divided by a positive will give us a negative. I hope that makes sense, ladies and gents, right? Okay, so let's try another one. Okay, right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take one where the coefficient of x squared is actually greater than 1. Okay, so now something else to just remind ourselves. Okay, so let's say I've got negative 2x squared plus 3x plus 2, which is equal to 0. Now, if the coefficient of x squared is negative, always make this a habit for yourself. Always make it positive, okay? By multiplying by the negative, okay? So it means everything changes sign essentially. So I'm going to multiply by -1. So -1 times -2, that becomes 2x squared. So everything changes sign. That's going to be minus 3x. That becomes -2. Remember, 0 times -1 is still 0. So that doesn't change. Okay, right. Now let's solve by, completing the square. Okay, so in this case, we said, what's the first thing that we're going to do? We're going to divide everything, okay, by the coefficient of x squared. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. So 2 divided by 2, that gives me 1. So that becomes x squared minus 3 divided by 2. So that becomes 3 over 2 minus, in this case, 2 divided by 2, that will become 1. And this is equal to 0. Right, so we are going to isolate our constant term, right? So x squared minus 3 over 2 is equal to, please remember, the 1, when we take it to the other side, it becomes positive now. So now we said we take our middle term. Sorry about that, I'd forgotten to write x there. So we take our middle term, right? So we said our middle term is 3 over 2, or you can say -3 over 2 squared, right? So you know, -3 over 2 times a half. You said we multiply by half and you square that. Okay, right. So that becomes -3 over 4 squared. Okay, and remember, we said you can actually get the answer to this. That would give you 9 over 16, right? But as I did say to you, I prefer taking this as is. Why? Because it will help me to know what the brackets are, right? So that's going to be plus a -3 over 4 squared. But remember what I do on the left, I do on the right. That's -3 over 4 squared. Sorry about that clumsiness there. Right, and then I factorize. And I said in factorizing that becomes easy because I take the square root of this, the square root of that. So that becomes x minus 3 over 4, right? So I take the sign as well, right? In this case, so that's x minus 3 over 4. That's squared is equal to, now on the other side, that's going to be 1 plus. Now remember, once I square this, it becomes 9 over 16. Okay, right. So now, as I said, you can just decide to use your calculator. So I'm going to say 1 plus 9 over 16. Okay, so that gives us 25 over 16. So I've got x minus 3 over 4 squared, which is equal to 25, that's what we said, right? 25 over 16. Over 16, right? So now I can take the square root on both sides. And I said once I take the square root on both sides, please remember this becomes plus or minus. So now I've got x minus 3 over 4 is equal to, right? So plus or minus square root of 25 is 5, square root of 16 in this case is 4, right? So I've got two solutions. Minus 3 over 4 is equal to 5 over 4, or x minus 3 over 4 is equal to negative 5 over 4. So I've got x is equal to, right, I've got 5 over 4 plus 3 over 4, or x is equal to negative 5 over 4 plus 3 over 4. So x would be equal to, right, I said in our fractions, if the denominators are the same, we just simply add the numerators and keep the denominator. We're going to come to fractions later on. So in this case, that's going to be 5 plus 3, that will be 8. So 8 over 4, that will give us 2. So x is 2, or x is negative, again, we're going to take 4 as our denominator. So that's negative 5 plus 3, that will give us negative 2. And of course, that will give us 2 into itself once, into 4 twice. So that's going to be negative 1 over 2. All right, and that is our final answer, right? That is how we're going to actually solve for that. I hope you're getting the gist of it, okay, without necessarily wanting to make it longer than it should be, right? I'd like for you to try one for yourself, okay? But before we actually just try one for ourselves, I wanted to actually show you where the quadratic formula comes from, ax squared plus bx plus c, which is equal to 0. So to find the quadratic formula, what you'd use is a completion of the square, right, on the standard format of the quadratic equation. And remember, how did we do that? We said the first thing is that you're going to divide by the coefficient of the x squared term, right? So let's do that quickly. So this is going to be x squared plus b over a x plus c over a. And remember, 0 divided by a would still be 0. So that doesn't change. So we're going to say x plus b over a x, and we're going to take c over a to the other side. But remember, for us to do that, we need to change the sign. So that's going to be minus c over a, right? And then, now we said you take the middle term, right? So that's going to be b over a multiplied by 1 over 2, and you square that. So what does that give you? B over 2a squared. And we said you take this, you're going to add it there, so that's b over 2a squared. But what I do on the left, I do on the right, b over 2a squared. Right, now we open the bracket there. We factorize, so that's going to be plus b over 2a squared is equal to, now on the other side, what I've got is minus c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, so I want you to think about that one, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to try and add what's on the left hand side as well as what's on the right hand side. So what I'm going to do is just try to simplify what's on the right hand side. So I've got x plus b over 2a squared, which is equal to, now I want you to note in this case, right, what is our common factor in this particular one. So remember, I am adding fractions, right? So 4a squared is our LCD, right? 4a squared is our LCD. Now, remember, when you add fractions, you'll say LCD divided by the denominator multiplied by the numerator. As I said, for those of you who don't understand that yet, don't worry, I'll take you through that with time. So 4a squared divided by a, that will give me 4a, right? Multiplied by c, so that will be minus 4ac, right? Plus, in this case, 4a squared divided by 4a squared, that will give me 1. 1 plus b squared, 1 times b squared will give me b squared. So that's how I have that on the other side. So on the right hand side, okay, I've got b squared minus 4ac, just to put it nicely, divided by 4a squared, okay? And on the left hand side, I've got x plus b over 2, okay, and this is all squared. Now, what we're going to do is take the square root on both sides, but remember we say plus or minus, so I'm going to say x plus b over 2a is equal to, now remember, that's plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by the square root of 4a squared is 2a, right? So now we can say x, take this to the other side, that becomes minus b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And of course, finally, we can put this all together. The denominators are the same, so in this case we can add the numerators. So that's 2a, so that's minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, okay, and divided by 2a, and that's where the quadratic formula comes from. All right, so just to leave it here, ladies and gents, I want you to try out one out for yourself, and please tell me what your answer is. So that's 6x squared plus 11x plus 3. Please tell me what your final answer is by completing the square. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Sharp, sharp.